Me mech, no scout, no pivot. That phrase is now synonymous with the set that saved TFT. A landmark moment in Riot's history where they managed to take a struggling IP and turn it into a powerhouse in the auto battler space. And considering recent events where Riot has laid off staff in a lot of different areas, and TFT is now considered a core game, it goes to show how far we've come from the clusterfuck that was Set 2. So how did we get here? How did we go from TFT almost getting the axe to now being a household name? I would challenge you to find someone that played Set 3 and didn't find the design of the set amazing. There is only one problem with the set that I can think of off the top of my head, and that is the fact that Jin was released on Set 3 and not Set 4. I don't think it'd be hyperbolic to say that Set 3 revolutionized the auto battler genre, because once they were released, galaxies changed everything. One of the problems with auto battlers in general is the fact that they have realistically limited replayability to them. So with League, you can spend countless hours perfecting your mechanics, and every game you can go in and try to limit test. But with things like TFT and other auto battlers in general, it's like once you finish playing every comp, you've played every comp. There's not really much else to do except for grind out LP, which can get pretty tedious after a while, and that's why player-based drops are very, very common. But the Galaxy mechanic, which is a precursor to Portals, changed all of that, and it actually allowed more replayability over a longer period of time because you were constantly searching for new interactions. And this is even better than what they did in Set 2, where you chase these ridiculous, broken, overpowered things to do. It was like novel replayability in a much more accessible package. That's not to say that Set 3 and the galaxies weren't without its frustrations. There were a lot of galaxies that kind of left a bad taste in people's mouths, especially ones like Littler Legends, Binary System, and sometimes Lilac Galaxy. I mean, even Mort said himself that Lilac Galaxy, if you just got Soraka, you basically lost the game. But there was still some, standout good ones like Treasure Trove. Everyone loved Treasure Trove. When Trade Sector became an augment, it was also like the randomness about it, so it wasn't guaranteed. Every game was different, and sometimes there was no galaxy, and I think that helped keep people interested and invested because they wanted to get to those really cool ones, especially on the last patch with the Big 4 Fun Galaxy they introduced. For the most part, it was an incredibly intuitive set. You didn't have to worry about 30Zs spawning on your board and just being completely overwhelmed. For a new player, that can be quite annoying to deal with. In fact, someone wrote on my comments exactly that situation. It turned them off TFT for a very long time. So it was really good that they decided to go for these really obvious things that you can play around. I mean, you look at Mech, and don't get me wrong, Mech had some broken periods of time, but you kind of knew that it was a threat. And it was that pivot away from unintuitive and awkward gameplay patterns that Set 1 and 2 had in abundance, even though they were wonderfully designed sets, just some of the gameplay elements made it very frustrating for people to play against, case in point being Hextech and Glacial. But what Set 3 did, okay, granted there was Demolitioner Spat and Demolitioner in general, it kind of dialed back the amount of CC that was available in the game. They removed Hush, for instance, which was a huge step. I mean, they should have realistically removed the on-hit disarm item. At least they made it so units could actually cast during it. These are just some of the ways that Riot actually addressed what happened in Set 2 and tried to make it right with Set 3. But of course, you could have amazing sets with great themes and interesting mechanics, but what's really important is the units and their traits. And this is what set 3 did that surpassed its contemporaries and probably is one of the best designed sets outside of set 4. And yeah, I'm gonna go with just set 4. Riot basically made it so the Sejuani from set 1 was the benchmark for exciting abilities and cool units, and then they gave us things like Gangplank and the Mech and Kale and Vel'Koz. These units were amazing. I mean, they had problems, sure, but they were fantastic. And then like the introduction to the mercenary trait with Misfortune and Gangplank, it was kind of like a Build-A-Bear at the time. Sure, now we have Aurelia, but pretty nuts that you could buy abilities for your units. And for Gangplank in particular, there was a lot of avenues that you could go down that really changed the game to game. And Gangplank was a very special case in TFT history because he fit into almost any comp. Well, he had a few comps that were very standout, one being Rebel and the other one being Sorcerer. Now the Rebel meta was basically like twofold. One was there was barely any damage back then, so you could basically play almost 0 units until stage 4-2 and you didn't die. Two was they reintroduced the spatula to the first carousel, so you could genuinely open 4 and look for a Rebel spare and then put it on Gangplank. And then you combine that with the fact that on this patch in 10.6 the shop odds were 7% for a 5 cost at level 8, you just know there were some problems there. Sorcerer in set 3 literally just gave AP to other units, so Gangplank got 100% of the Sorcerer AP, which basically meant he could one-shot an entire board if he got the right spells. But there was one more comp that Gangplank fit into, and that was Space Pirates. Pirates was the first economy trait that actually produced items, and there is nothing that spikes dopamine harder than Gangplank ulting an entire team and you getting a shitload of items, or having a 3-star Darius or a 3-star Jace just going through the enemy team. I mean, a lot of people have now experienced that with the 3.5 set, but you have to remember this is back a long time ago, before all this, so it was quite exciting to be able to have this trait to chase. And for it to produce so much, like you kind of had like almost like a little mini game. How many items can I get this game? And we can see that because now every set since then has had an economy trait in some form or another. This also marked the time that people started using interesting vernacular to describe certain comps. One called Bang Bros, which was Rebel Master Yi, and another one called Squid, which was Vel'Koz. Oh, and let's not forget E-Girls. Bang Bros, or Rebel Blade Master, was a level 7 comp where you rolled down to find Yasuo and Master Yi and turned them into an Exodia that just ran around the map killing everything. It's pretty fun, but it wasn't really like the hardest comp in the game. In fact, most people hated it because it was so simplistic. But my favourite reroll comp of all time, which is actually a little bit of a meme, was Chrono Ashe. It wasn't a standard build, like it was never meta specifically, but you know, you just played it when it was a good time to play it and had some fun, but you never expected to actually get some LP from it. And then there was the most broken one we had ever seen, and that was Mech Kai'Sa, and it was reroll Kai'Sa basically, and it was, you put Demolition of Spat on Kai'Sa with Shaco, and because you had like a Dark Star with Lux, it just kind of was absolutely disgusting. I mean, Shaco had Edge of Night built in with his ability. He basically turned invisible, dropping a aggro, put him into the backline, and he just kills everything. And then you had Darkstar, where he got more attack damage. It got a little bit excessive. In fact, he was nerfed so many times that they had to hotfix him at one point because they just made him so bad. But of course, the star was Meg, and Titan Resolve QSS Meg was basically the bread and butter of that comp. Without it, he kind of lost to any kind of Zephyr. And I mean, Demolition of Spat was basically broken in general. You could put it on any unit, put it with Mech or with Gangplank or with Rebel, and it just did all of the work for you. And of course there was Pikachu Zaya, which I think everyone has fondness for. They still try to copy it with different comps. So it had its place and it still has its place. I just miss when Shiv was actually a good item. But Cybernetics was, you know, just a very strong comp. You just chucked in vertical cybernetics and he capped out very well with Echo. And Echo was an amazing unit. I mean, you just watched him zip around the screen. He was a lot of fun. And if you got an Infiltrator spat on Aurelia, you basically won the game. And there was Jin, of course, and Jin was a fantastic unit, but he was very awkward in set 3. He really came to his own in set 3.5 when he had Astro and the other sniper units. Until then, it was kind of vertical Darkstar and just really Vanguard sniper. And then there was Squid Brawlers, or Void Brawlers, which included Vel'Koz, who got removed in 3.5, and this was my favourite comp of the set. I have to say, I spammed it consistently, and I think it's because Vel'Koz was such a cool unit, and the reason why he got removed was not because he was bad, it's just because I think programming his targeting was just such a headache for Riot. And as a consequence, he ended up having one of the weirdest positionings we've ever seen. But there was one point at the set where the Squid got taken to another level, and that's not because of Vel'Koz, and that's because of Sona. And the item that they replaced Hush with, which was Chalice, which gave your team mana. And with Vel'Koz, it was insane. And Blaster Bruiser, which was like a staple the entire set, which just used Jinx and red buff. Like if you got a red buff early on and a Bruiser opener, you just played this comp and it was so easy to top 4, and if you got some rods, you just built a Misfortune and went even harder. And then there's Blade Master Kayle, which was one of the few vertical Blade Masters that we've seen actually be successful standalone without the use of a spatula. You know, this is a comp that you played if you weren't going bang bros, but you still wanted to play Blade Master. And that kind of brings me to Thresh. Now, Thresh in set 3 wasn't as prevalent as he was in set 3.5, mainly because there was no Urgot in set 3. But he did have his uses at certain points, mainly just to cap out your board at level 9 or something. But he was one of the wildest units we'd ever seen up until that point. Being able to throw more units onto the board was such an interesting thing, especially back then. And then one comp that was absolutely disgusting was Reroll Celestial, and your ability to play around either Xin Zhao or Kassadin as your main carry, with all the inbuilt healing and the tankiness and the shields that you got. And it was a lot of people's least favourite comp to play against. And the last comp I want to talk about is E-Girls, or Star Guardians. And when the set was originally released, there was no 5 cost that they could play around, so it was kind of like relegated to specifically a reroll comp. But then once they introduced Xerath, it took on a whole nother life of its own. This is before 3.5, so it didn't have as high of a cap, but it was still a really solid comp. And it was kind of before everyone realized that you could put Gangplank with sorcerers and just kill everyone. Even though set 3 was fantastic, it did have some problems.
Set 3 didn't launch with its mechanic. Set 3, the first 2 weeks, there were no galaxies. That's a big munka nowadays. Could you imagine just like, yeah, you don't get Treasure Dragon or Dragons today. Like, there's just no world.
So even though it didn't release with its set mechanic, it actually did release with an esports, or more specifically, it released with a showcase where TFT streamers and personalities competed for a small prize pool, and then they announced the TFT Set 3 World Championship at the end of the set. I say small, but the prize pool was $150,000. But I think it was actually important for these things to happen. People are kind of used to League of Legends and its esports scene, so it made sense for TFT to have its own esports. Even if it was kind of just shoehorned in and not really organically grown like League of Legends was. And I think it was also that push for competition and the announcement of a Worlds that really got people more interested in playing TFT, because now there was a long-term objective. Now you had something to play for when you were grinding all this LP. But now it's like you get a Challenger and you could go to Worlds. And I think that was a big mental shift for a lot of people, especially like the ladder warriors at the top. Now it just wasn't about playing the game, it was about competing. Esports is one part of the equation, so we've covered the set, we've covered the units. There's one other thing that I need to talk about. One point that I cannot stress enough that was possibly the saving grace of TFT. Granted, it was an amazing set and it was worthy of praise, but there was one other aspect that actually changed the game, and that was the introduction of mobile TFT. Mobile TFT's release date couldn't have come at a better time. Most of the world had just gone into lockdown, which had just caused a huge spike in mobile phone sales that we're still seeing to this day, and Riot was a huge recipient of that. I mean, even now, you look at the Chinese mobile market for TFT, it eclipses the rest of the world combined and then some. 15 million daily active users compared to the rest of the world's 30 million monthly users. So with the lockdown, people at home playing games, and with mobile TFT just released, everyone has a mobile phone, and maybe they don't want to play League, they just want to sit on the sofa with their phone, playing a little bit of casual things with characters that they love and are familiar with. Now, I'm not going to say mobile TFT was the best thing ever. It had a lot of problems with it, it still does. But I can't help but feel that it was just the perfect storm for Set 3 to succeed. It really revolutionized everything that an auto battler could be. You know, it gave us galaxies. It really set the idea of new sets in the consciousness of everyone's mind. And it gave the Riot team faith and motivation to actually push forward TFT to new heights, into new areas, and with more exploration. And it also introduced us to a whole other concept that we take for granted. I mean, now it's gone, but it was the 0.5 set, which did a huge job of making Set 3 the best it possibly could have been. But that's a story for another day.